Hey, welcome back. Hope you're staying cool because this is our weekend to melt in the heat. Anyway, I realize it's Saturday, folks. I was supposed to do a Zoom on yesterday, but things got a little weird, and for some reason, once again, my number's not working to get the group on Zoom. I'm still working on it. Hopefully next week, so I could see and maybe possibly put faces to the names of all you students in the class. Anyway, it is Saturday. It's about 2 o'clock. It's supposed to be cooling down. It's only 105 right now, but it's supposed to get a little better tomorrow. The next day, this is Reading in the summer. Anyway, I wanted to finish out this week with more contemporary artists. I had you watch those videos last week. Hopefully you're writing your paper because it's going to be due on Monday. Either you can write one on Rembrandt or Vermeer, 3-page analytical research paper. And if you are, watch those documentaries. That's all you have to watch, and write the paper according to what you've seen here on the documentary. And once again, it's not a review of the documentary, whether you're liked it or you're bored with it or whatever. It's a review of the man in the documentary, his life and his legacy. That's what I'm looking for. And put some context into it. Why are we still looking at this art all these years later? Why does it still have meaning? It's a part of who we are. It's part of our humanities, part of our humanness. They were Dutch painters. That means they were painting in the Netherlands. If you've never been there, I suggest you go. It's pretty nice. Holland, Rotterdam, beautiful. Rent a motorcycle. It's flat. Anyway, on that account, today I'm just going to briefly talk about a couple more artists, but into the 20th century, essentially. That's the last century, folks, not now. Because there's art being created right now, but not like the genius art that I want to deal with today. And the late 19th century, we had an artist, Van Gogh. Maybe you've heard of him. And once again, he's a Dutch artist. That was a lot of artists were working in that area at that one time, because I told you of the port city. Things were happening. It's a very modern time for the times, and the world was changing, and the light there is really incredible. The light. If you go out to side to paint, Rembrandt painted a lot of portraits inside, but Van Gogh spent his whole life mostly going outside and painting what he saw. And in his lifetime, he was not a successful artist at all. He had a lot of emotional problems, mental problems that we could probably take care of today with a medication, but we didn't have that in those days. And so he was probably bipolar. Might have been schizophrenic also. But his mental instability added to his art in a great way. A lot of artists are tortured, and he is the classic tortured artist. He really never found love in his life. He never really accomplished what he wanted to, but he painted for 10 years like a madman that he was. Maybe you know him from the guy who cut his ear off because of a fallen romance. It was a lot more detailed than that. It just wasn't that. And he only cut part of his ear off, but that's what happens when you're a misunderstood artist in a time that nobody understands you. You want to cut something off. Hopefully it's just an error. Anyway, Van Gogh is important. I want to have a discussion this week. It'll go on from today till next Saturday, and you could discuss these artists I'm going to talk about today. Van Gogh. I want you to go online in the next couple of days and look at some paintings of Van Gogh. They're all there, and start voicing your opinion. You get it? You don't get it? You saw it? What did it mean to you? Does it have any meaning to you? Have you ever seen a Van Gogh? I bet you have, and you don't even know it. Because some of them are very, very famous. Now, he never sold in his lifetime because it was too radical at the time. He was changing things up. People wanted realistic portraitures of trees and streams. He didn't do that. He was giving his impression of what the stream and trees look like. Sometimes they don't look like a picture, like a photograph. Sometimes it looks different in your mind's eye, and that's what he was painting. And he discovered a whole new way of doing things. And folks, he painted for 10 years. That's it. And now his works are priceless. You can't put a price tag on them. And he painted a lot of paintings in 10 years, something like 2,500 paintings. That's a lot. He was obsessed with getting his inner vision, and a lot of it was beauty. A lot of it was him looking at beauty in a conflicting way and getting it on canvas. Try it. It's not that easy. Anyway, he is essentially possibly the godfather of modern art, modern abstract art, sort of, although he wasn't doing abstracts, but it was getting on the edge of that. And then in the 1900s, a gentleman named Pablo Picasso showed up, and he was born in Madrid, Spain, and he started painting, and the world never looked back. Picasso changed the art world. He's still changing the art world. Please go, maybe you've heard of Picasso, hopefully you have. Go seek his artwork out online and talk about it in the discussion. I had the pleasure being in Spain, where most of his art is housed in Madrid, and what he did was incredible. It was a revolution. I remember in a room, here's a painting, and it says something like June 1912. And you look at it, and it's one of his sort of, I hate to say typical, but his revolutionary painting where the woman is very abstract. She might have 3 eyes. She might have 3 breasts. That's how he looked at women. He objectified them. He did. And sometimes they have more than one face because he felt they were two-faced, possibly. So they're not beautiful paintings. They don't look like human beings. It's what he sees in his mind's eye, what his idea of a woman was or is. So right next to that painting, done in June, there's a painting next to it, polar opposite, completely 100 degrees different, and it's painted in the same month. He did this painting over here, and it's completely different than this one. And this painting over here was a revolution, and this is continuing the revolution, and it's completely different. And you go, well, how's that possible that he could do 2 of those in 1 month? And then behind me, there was 2 sculptures. He also did sculptures, folks, out of what he called found material. And they're abstracts, and they're incredible. And it'll say June 1912, the same month he did these 2 paintings. There's a sculpture right next to that sculpture, 100% different than this other sculpture, made out of found material, and it'll say June 1912. He did all 4 of these things in 4 weeks. You know, he was one of the few authentic geniuses in our time, in anybody's time. And I don't like throwing that word out there because it's thrown out there too much, but when it applies, it really applies to somebody like Pablo Picasso. And he lived to be an old man in his 90s. He lived until 73 or some, 1973 or so. And there have been movies made about him, lots of literature on him, lots of documentaries. Check some of them out. At least check his paintings out so you could talk about them in an intelligent way on the discussion. And he hit a blue period. Why don't you explain in the discussion what the blue period is? I'm not going to tell you what it is. Do a little research. What was Pablo Picasso's blue period? Why was it considered the blue period? And why is it important? I'll put that in the discussion. I'll put that prompt in the discussion. I'm going to post that later. Then we get into later on in the 20th century, and we start to get into abstract expressionism and the legendary Velum De Kooning, who was born in Rotterdam, but he immigrated to America as an immigrant in the early 1900s, and painted. He was quite old when he died, finally, of Alzheimer's in the 1990s, I believe, and he once again changed the landscape of art. I would say the 20th century landscape, but it's the landscape of all art. But he mostly painted in the mid 20th century, and that means the 1940s, 50s, 60s. He was the epitome of abstract expression. Now, you're going to have to Google that term, but it's like looking at the world. You're expressing what you're seeing in an abstract manner. It's not a realistic depiction of, let's say, a tree or a bowl of fruit. It's an abstract. And he was painting, he's very disciplined. The amount of work he put out was incredible. And in the meantime, he's a world-class alcoholic, world-class womanizer who was married to a very, very strong woman who was, in her own right, a really great artist, but women never get their due in the male-dominated art world. And she not only took care of him and got his art out there, behind every strong man, a lot of times there's a more strong woman. And De Kooning's wife was that. And she outlived him. And they had a beautiful place out on Long Island with a beautiful studio. Towards the end of his life, he made a lot of money. In the meantime, during his time, his peer was another guy who changed the face of art named Jackson Pollock. You need to look at some Jackson Pollock work. He was actually born near here in Paradise, Chico, in that area. And he gravitated towards New York City when he needed to be there, because that's where a lot of great artists needed to go to get noticed and to be inspired. And Pollock is known for being a world-class alcoholic. That's right. World-class womanizer. That's right. These guys were considered rock stars of their days, and they drank and had sex like there's no tomorrow. And I don't blame them. And he is known for what they call the drip paintings. Check one out online. Just look at one and tell me what you think. Look at it deeply. They made a movie, a very good one with Ed Harris a couple years ago. Actually, it's early 2000s, so maybe you weren't even born then. Really decent movie. If you ever want to check it out, it's called Pollock. It's excellent. Anyway, and he was, for 10 years, he did these drip paintings, essentially in a huge barn, once again, out on Long Island, where they could get cheap houses in those days. You can't afford it now, folks. It's one of the most expensive real estate in the world out there on Long Island, where these guys were. De Kooning was out there. Lots of famous artists are still out there. Rock stars go out there. Guys like Paul Simon and Billy Joel, if you know who the hell I'm talking about. They live out there. Only the best for those folks. If you've never been on Long Island, please go. It will blow your mind. Go to Sagaponack, go to the beaches, Jones Beach, and your mind will be blown. Anyway, lots of famous writers. I'm not talking about writers yet, but I will next week and the week afterward. They lived out there. Truman Capote lived out there. Kurt Vonnegut. They all had New York apartments, but they wanted to escape into nature. And so in those days, they could actually buy a beach house. You can actually afford it. Now you can't afford it unless you are, Bill Gates or somebody. They can afford it. Anyway, so Jackson was out there doing these drip paintings. They're huge. He puts them on the floor of the canvas, and he literally takes a paintbrush and dips it into the paint. He was using household paints, folks, because it was cheap. And he wasn't using fancy oils, because let me tell you, he's putting out a volume of paint. It's incredible. And he lets the paint drip off the brush. And to see what happens. And if you've never seen one, I bet you have without knowing it, because they're on calendars and cards, and they're kind of kitschy collectibles now. But if you ever get a chance, folks, and hope you do, go to the Modern Art Museum in New York City and see a couple Jackson Pollocks in person. They're awe-inspiring. I can't explain it. They're nothing like they look like in the photos. When you really get up close to it, and you see the amount of purpose and the amount of creativity and the amount of paint and time and effort that goes into putting one of these things together, it's really amazing. And they did sell. He became famous and rich in his time, but because of his world-class alcoholism, which you can't get around, folks, once you're an alcoholic of that level, a lot of times you don't recover, and he didn't. He was typical contrarian artist. He rebelled against the establishment, and he made a lot of enemies. Painting these, sometimes people are labeled genius, abuse their genius. He could have been one of those. It's up to you whether you believe that or not. You have to read the material, whether you care to or not. But he was, in a way, kind of a rock star in the 1950s. He was painting when rock and roll was starting up. These other painters were painting earlier than that. But the music was changing. The country was changing. What's going on in the country that's causing this change? Well, we came out of World War II, and we had been in the biggest war anybody's ever seen. And we, meaning the free world, came out victorious. We defeated Hitler and his mob, and our parents came home, my dad's generation, not your dad's, your grandparents or maybe great-grandparents, and they came home to a different world where they had more opportunity than ever before. And this is putting it into context. Why are these painters thriving in this era after the World War II, say 1948 to 1958? Why was music changing? Why did rock and roll change? Why did jazz change? Why did Miles Davis happen? I'll be talking about this later next week when we talk about music. Literature was changing. Some of our greatest American writers, from Kurt Vonnegut to James Jones, were writing post-World War II novels. Maybe you've seen them or heard of them. Maybe you've heard of Catch-22. Maybe you've heard of Slaughterhouse-Five. If you haven't, you need to read it. And if you don't like reading, start liking reading, because an entire world will open up for you that you didn't even know existed. You can't get everything from a visual medium. You can't. It's impossible. So read as much as you can. Look at as many films as you can. Listen to as much music as you can. All sorts of music, from classical to bebop, jazz, to punk rock, to hip hop, all of it. Soak it in, because that's our humanity, folks, and that's who we are at this point in our time. And in this pandemic especially, there's going to be some great art coming out of this thing. We'll see. It's a little too soon to say. But musicians are starting to record again. They're starting to put out pandemic records. There are going to be plays and movies, and to look at this time in our history, because the plague is on us, folks. And when the plague is here, incredible art can happen. There was another plague long time ago, not that long ago, and there's some great novels written out of that plague. One of them was what they call the plague. Kafka wrote novels about the plague. The plagues have been around, folks, but we're in the middle of another one. Who would have thought? Anyway, so I want you guys to look seriously at those people. Then during the late 1950s, early 60s, a guy by the name of Andy Warhol popped up. Andy Warhol, once again, changed art. He created this thing people called pop art. Maybe you've heard of him. Maybe you think he's the funny guy with the weird wig on his head. If you think that, you don't know anything, really. You've got to look at what made Andy Warhol the cultural phenomena he was. He's famously known for starting the Factory. It was called the Factory in New York City, where they created art on a major scale. He managed a rock band called the Velvet Underground, which essentially almost started punk rock, if you like that, which I love. And this is 1965, 20 years before punk rock really started, or I should say 15 or so. Anyway, and he created films and art, and it's all pretty subversive. But his most famous pieces are what they call silk screens. It's a process. It's not actually painting. It's putting ink on a paper and doing this process called silk screen. And he did these silk screen paintings of famous celebrities like Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, Elizabeth Taylor. He was obsessed with celebrities. These things changed the way we look at celebrities, and now they're virtually priceless. If you have one of Andy Warhol's silk screens, an original, not a copy, even the copies are worth many, many thousands. Keep it. It'll be your grandkids will never have to work either. Anyway, but he started by making Campbell's soup cans. Maybe you've heard of this. Go look at it. Go check out Campbell's soup cans, Andy Warhol. I'll put this on the discussion. Tell me, and he essentially painted Campbell's soup cans in a very realistic way. Why would that sell? Why would that mean anything? Well, he was making a comment on consumerism, right? You know, because at one time, in the old days, before you were born, you used to have to make soup the old way. Campbell's soup came in and made it this new way. You didn't have to do anything. You just had to open a can and heat it. That changed everything in the 50s. Oh, our parents loved it because now they just had to open a can, dump it in the pot, you've got soup. Now, let me tell you, it wasn't that good for you, but we all ate it. And so he made this comment. He painted in those days every flavor of soup in a realistic way. Well, when people saw it, they go, well, this is not art. What is this? You just painted a soup can. Well, they were wrong. And they became so sought after, I think it's 26 cans about that, that if somebody right now owns all of them and they're worth $100 million, and they do put them on display in Warhol's museum and elsewhere around the country. Check it out if you ever get to see it. And then later on, he did other what they call consumer art. He did the Brillo. Brillo, we don't even have that anymore. It would be like an SOS pad. Maybe you guys know what that is. They used to have these Brillo pads that scrub your pots and pans. He did the Brillo boxes. And he got wealthy in his own time. And he was provocative. He got tired of art. He started making underground films. He only made half a dozen. And I'd like you to, well, when we get to films, maybe you have the guts to see it, or the patience, I should say, or the courage to see a Warhol film. They're all online. Some of them are 5 minutes long. Some of them are 8 hours long. Let's put this one. One of his first films was called Man Sleeping. Warhol was famous homosexual. He filmed his boyfriend sleeping for 8 hours. That's it, folks. That's the entire movie. And it shows this guy, kind of a middle-aged, overweight dude with a shirt off, sleeping. He filmed it for 8 hours. Now, let me give you an example. You guys could film on your cell phones, no problem. But in those days, there was no such thing as digital media. It was all actually film. And he had a 16-millimeter camera, and they have little wounds like this that can be 3 minutes to 10 minutes long. That's it. So if you film somebody for 8 hours, you know how much film that is? That's a lot of film. And you got to change the film out, put it in there, and start filming again. So that's one of his famous paintings. Another one is the Empire State Building. He filmed that in 1 8-hour night. He just trained the camera in the Empire State Building for 8 solid hours. That's it, folks. That's the entire movie. You see the lights go on. You see them come off. You see a little movement in the windows. It's not that exciting. But it was his idea of showing our who we are. And he made other more provocative films. He was a voyeur. Uh, some people said he was asexual. He wasn't, but meaning he didn't have a preference for sex or didn't engage in sex. He was definitely a voyeur, meaning the guy who likes to watch. And so he would film people having real sex, folks, men and women. He has one film called Blowjob. Watch it. You can watch it online. Yes, folks, it's a blowjob. Am I hurting anybody's feelings? You know what a blowjob is. Do I have to explain things to you? Oral sex. Okay. And it's a close, we don't know who's doing the blowjob. We don't know if it's male or female. All it is 10 minutes or so, a close up of a man's face receiving oral sex. That's the whole movie. It's his ecstasy. We don't know who's doing the blowjob. It seems homoerotic, meaning we think it's a male doing a male. We'll never know. Is it really happening, or is the guy faking it? I think I've read so much about Warhol. I don't think he was faking it. I think he was receiving oral sex, and Warhol filmed it. And where were these? You ask yourself, where were these movies shown? Well, they're shown in art galleries, museums. They were not shown in movie theaters, folks. Nobody wants to see an 8-hour movie about the Empire State Building. I don't think, unless that's your cup of tea. But I bet a bunch of you are going to Google the blowjob right now. But Hollywood celebrities embraced Warhol. The avant-garde embraced Warhol. Rock bands embraced Warhol. Jim Morrison and the Doors spent time at the factory. Nico, the great singer and muse to many rock stars, was a fixture there. She was the singer for the Velvet Underground. Maybe you've seen a movie or you've seen excerpts. If you've seen The Doors, that movie, there's a scene there. If you've seen Midnight Cowboy, they have a scene in the factory. There have been many, many movies. I Shot Andy Warhol is one. Andy Warhol was stalked by a radical feminist lesbian who didn't think she was getting treated well by him, and Valerie, and she showed up at Warhol's. Anybody could go to the factory in those days. You could just go to the factory, go upstairs, and hang out. She shows up with a gun, and she shot Andy Warhol 3 times in the gut. And she shot somebody else too, and then she threw the gun down, went to the police, and said, "I just shot Andy Warhol," because he didn't treat her right. Well, he didn't die, but he almost died, folks. The bullet pierced his kidneys, his spleen, his liver. And for the rest of his life, he constantly had to deal with the damage those bullets did to his body. And he changed after that. He got a security guard after that. You could not just walk into the office. And Valerie, poor thing, she went off and she had written a book called Scum, and it's for it's a manifesto for cutting up men. She wanted all men to be cut up and murdered. We don't need men. And then later on, she mellowed her stance and said, "I don't want to murder all men. I just want all men to be castrated." So she was not a real fun person, and she died homeless in poverty. She went to jail only for 3 years in a mental institution, and she was released and died homeless and pitiless in the Tenderloin district in San Francisco, if you know where that is. About 2 years after Warhol died in 86. She died in 88. She was dumped. She had to eat out of the dumpsters. So she was, but in her way, you could get her Scum manifesto. You could buy it online. There's some actually intelligent stuff in there. Radical feminism of the highest order. But she makes some good points. It's just that she was mentally ill also. So check these painters out. One other painter I'll talk about real quick, then I'll shut up, is Jean-Michel Basquiat. Was a black painter in New York City. He was an Andy Warhol He was his protege, and he came up in the east side of New York. Uh, if you've ever been in New York, the East Village was the hip happening place, a place you could actually afford to live. Can't afford to live there anymore. Mark's Place, St. Mark's Place, the famous church was there, and rock bands played there, musicals, plays. It was a very, very liberal church, Catholic church that invited creativity. And it was sort of, if you've ever been to San Francisco, it's sort of the Haight-Ashbury of New York City. It definitely was. And he thrived in that. He came up. He started as a graffiti artist around New York City, and then people started noticing how good the graffiti was. And then so somebody, an art dealer, famous art dealer, had a gallery who sold people's art, named Mary Boone, gave him a monthly stipend, gave him a studio to paint in, and he painted like crazy. And he adored Andy Warhol. He also played in a rock band, kind of synthetic pop, what they call industrial synth music, if you know what that is. When the punk rock, artistic rock scene in New York was happening, say from 78 to about 85, and things were happening in New York on a huge scale, with music and films and art and literature, and he was a part of that. And they made a great movie. He didn't play the part, of course, because he is dead. He died of an overdose at, I believe, 27 years old, heroin overdose in about 1988 or thereabouts. And Warhol took him under his wing, and they painted some stuff together, and he adored Warhol. Then they had a falling out because Basquiat felt that Warhol needed fresh, new generation of blood to infuse. He's like a vampire, to infuse his own creativity, which was kind of correct in a way. Warhol did use a lot of people, younger people, to stay young and hip and vital. And definitely Basquiat was feeling that he was being used, and so he broke the relationship off. And either one of them were the same again after that. Basquiat was a controversial figure because his stuff almost looks primitive, but it is unique and one of a kind. People are still copying his stuff. Recently, one of his paintings just sold for $30 million. So he did good in his lifetime, not that good. They weren't selling for it in those days, but he made some money in his lifetime. And then he got depressed and felt lost and alone, and he dabbled in heroin a lot, which people do, and he OD'd. He might have been 27. He might have been 26, but fascinating character. These are the art people I want you to check as many of these people you can online in the next week, okay? Look at their art. Maybe watch a little documentary by them. And then start the discussion. And I'll post that on discussions. Anyway, this is the weekend. I hope you guys are staying cool somehow. Temperatures are going to go down a little bit tomorrow. So look at these artists. I'll name them again on the discussion. I'll type their names in. You'll see them. And tell me what you think. And try to explain in your own words why they matter. Why does any of this matter? You know, these are desperate, desperate times with our wars we're waging in different countries, and other countries are waging war on us, and the virus, the economy, the politics of Washington. These are very, very trying times. And in trying times, that's when great art happens. Maybe you're one of those. Do something creative. On that happy note, stay safe, stay cool, and try to enjoy the life we have right now. Because this is it, folks. Anyway, see you later. Next time.